Hello, I'm Joyce.
I'm June.
And I'm Paula.
We're the Kavanagh sisters, and we'd like to welcome you to our series of Count Me In podcasts, where we continue to shine a light on childhood sexual abuse and its impacts.
As this is our first podcast, we thought we'd look at the difficulties in having a discussion around sexual abuse. We believe it's an essential thing and it needs to happen if we are ever to create change.
Well, I think it'd be interesting if we could answer the question that we've been asked. Why does somebody who hasn't been sexually abused need to understand the impacts of sexual abuse?
Well, mainly because when you think of what could have changed if in our day people were aware, and I'm talking about teachers, neighbours, if people were aware how different our life could have been. Nowadays there's no excuse because it is out there, and if more people took an interest in learning the truth about sexual abuse and its impacts, we could have a changed world.
Yeah. I feel it's everybody's responsibility to become informed about the impacts of abuse, because there isn't a single soul on this planet that isn't impacted by sexual abuse. I think myself, the reason people have so much difficulty talking about this particular issue is just as complex as the crime itself. When somebody brings up this topic, there's a sense that it's an overwhelming topic that there's no solution to. There's no answer. There's an element of, I don't want to know, I'm just so glad I don't have to deal with that. And I suppose one of the really most important points we're trying to make is that there isn't a human being alive that isn't being impacted by this crime. Whole crime survives on silence and secrecy. And by us not discussing it openly, we're actually feeding into that. Everything is being formed out of this crime, and that might sound like a dramatic statement to make, but if you look at the numbers of people who have been abused, if we were to go by the statistic of 1 in 4, I think it's 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men, which we know cannot be true because it's the most underreported crime globally. But if you were to only go by those statistics and you look at the small population of Ireland, when you go to work into your local shop, doctors, when you're in college, when you're in school, when you're in your home, there is nowhere you are not coming into contact with a victim of sexual abuse. It is now accepted by everybody that the way out of poverty is through education. Well, the way out of keeping a crime underground is by having open conversation and education around it. And the only way that we will ever have a chance of eradicating it.
Yeah, because you'd be able to recognise the signs.
But another thing that would really help would be good communication with children. At the time we grew up, children weren't really allowed a voice or an opinion. And the damage that has done, we're all paying the cost for now. But I know personally that if somebody would have taken a shine to me, a teacher or something in school, and connected with me and asked me, I would have told them about the abuse. And poor communication wreaks havoc across the world in businesses, in relationships, but in particular with children. You pay the cost of not having a communicative relationship with your child.
People assume that ignorance keeps children innocent, and it absolutely does not.
Well, it's really about busting the myth that if anything is going to happen to your child, it wouldn't happen until they were older.
And understanding that 97% of abusers are people the child knows, not strangers.
But just to get a grip on that realisation that, holding off on educating your child until you feel they're at an age where they'd be in danger. They're in danger from the moment they're born. And it might be unpleasant. It's not nice to be thinking and talking about harming children. But it's more important that you realise how those actions have impacted on your child. They're the things you will pick up on. You very rarely will catch somebody in the act of abusing, but it's the impacts it has on the person and how they respond out of those impacts that we all need to get educated about. Because people will get caught up with the sign and what do I look out for, and it might actually sound intimidating. But to calm it right down and focus simply on connecting with your child, they're much more likely to confide in you if they think you're on their side and they have an open relationship with you.
Yeah, so the purpose is to actually look and see if we can help people get over the difficulty they have in talking about sexual abuse. And I was just brought back to when we actually published our first book, and the amount of friends that approached us to say, listen, I bought your book to support you, but oh God, I couldn't read it. And I remember thinking at the time, like, Jesus Christ, it took us 20 years to write the thing. The least you could do is read it.
I just know if a friend of mine wrote a book about mechanics and I know nothing about it, I would read it because a friend of mine wrote it. But certainly something as personal as this, I would have went down my way to read it.
Yeah, it's very hurtful. And particularly if it's somebody close to you. I mean, my husband still hasn't read it.
No, and I don't know what that's about because, like, just remember all the conversations that Eamon would have been privy to.
It's tied in with this whole topic of why are people not comfortable talking about this whole issue. A percentage of people will be avoiding the possibility that you're going to trigger them and their experience of abuse.
Yeah, it's complex and it's difficult. And we as victims, it took us years to actually discuss it. And then we got upset because there were so many people shying away and didn't want to be part of that discussion. I just want to make it quite clear we're not actually talking about victims here because we do understand the complex issues around speaking out of your
victim.
victim.
We are talking about victims, it's
but
the unnamed victims.
Yeah, I know, and I suppose what we're trying to do is make it a bit easier for people to discuss it.
Well, we want to do that by demonstrating that there's life afterwards and that you can heal from it. It's not a life sentence and you shouldn't have to live out your entire life holding on to somebody else's shit.
Hypothetically now, say I'm an individual that has never been abused and I can honestly say I don't know anyone that has been abused. Yeah, I really sympathise and I hate the idea of, children being abused and all that, but I find it really, really uncomfortable. I don't know why, but I find it uncomfortable to talk about. Like, I'd like to help in any way I can, but I really don't want to get involved. How would you respond?
Even if it's the case that you believe that you don't know anybody who's been abused and you find it uncomfortable, are you planning on having a family? Do you have family? Do you have relatives who have children? Do you visit people, friends that have kids? And if your answer to that is yes, then I would be curious as to why would you not want to know how best to protect them? Surely the benefit of you understanding the impacts of abuse and how it happens and who it happens to, would you not think you have a duty to understand and protect those children who are walking around in this world?
I'd be asking you, what is it that we can do that might make it easier for people to hear, firstly, and then to get involved? Childhood trauma doesn't necessarily have to be sexual abuse. It's almost like, is there a way, and I'm not sure there is, because, we've had this discussion and we haven't found an answer, but is there a way to remove the threat that would allow people to just hear, to learn? I don't think anyone is protected by ignorance. I think you're putting yourself in more danger by ignorance. And, this thing of burying your head in the sand doesn't help anyone.
And surely the goal for all of us, regardless of what your background has been, is to live in a community that's happy and healthy.
It is such a complex issue. We haven't got all the answers. And this would require a humongous global response. I do think you should absolutely start at school level, deal with emotional intelligence. We didn't have the words to describe what we were feeling. If we stand together and continue to put pressure on the government to put the services in place. To be perfectly honest, if you're a sexual abuse victim, you don't want to discuss the ins and outs of it with any Joe soap. You do need somewhere safe to talk about that stuff.
There is support, there just isn't adequate support.
To make real, genuine changes and no more lip service, there is a number of people that actually need, it should be mandatory, that they're involved, that they have a true, deep understanding, not only of sexual abuse, of childhood trauma, not optional as far as I'm concerned. And they have to be the people, one, looking after people, anyone that's offering any kind of support, the whole judicial system, and the government. We've met the minister, nice guy and all as he is, he doesn't fully understand. He's not even dealing with the 16-year-old figures that he has. Everyone can get on board here. The role the media are playing in this, the language, terminology, the way it's actually put across.
You cannot underestimate the power of using the correct terminology. rape instead of abuse is much more powerful and much more honest.
You have to pick your words carefully, the same way you do with the child porn. No such thing as child porn. It's child sexual abuse. And when they say an underaged woman, it's not an underage woman, it's a child or a young girl. I mean, every day there's a media story where somebody's having to correct their wording because they're misrepresenting it, and they're doing a tremendous disservice to victims of abuse.
By calling abusers monsters, that allows us to not see the perpetrator and offender that's living amongst them.
When they're referred to as monsters, people are looking for somebody that's going to stand out. It'll be dead obvious that these are abusers, when the reality is they could be your brother, your uncle, your teacher.
It's a whole cultural shift is required, and it won't happen overnight, but we can all contribute to the eventual outcome we're all looking for. Everybody just challenge one person to either read a book or an article even, watch a movie, have a conversation, or ask a question that they're uncomfortable about or that they're really curious about. The decision to heal from childhood sexual abuse places you on the most important journey of your life. You're in charge of this journey. Only you know what works for you and what doesn't. It takes as long as it takes, because there's no rushing it and there's no faking it. You have to feel it. And just as the ripple of pain that you're in goes out and impacts all of those around you, so does the healing. And the more you heal, the more everyone around you benefits.
Thank you for listening. Hopefully some of the information we have shared will resonate with you. This will give you a deeper understanding of yourself, plus allow you to move into a space where you can show compassion to yourself. Please know that no matter how you feel or how you reacted to the abuse, it was normal. We are hopeful and optimistic that those in any position of power to bring about change will be moved into action, so we can finally eradicate childhood sexual abuse. So please spread the word and share the information. Thank you.
You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or contact us directly on the kavanaghsisters@gmail.com. You've been listening to the Kavanagh Sisters Count Me In podcast. We're going to leave you with a quote which you can carry with you throughout your day. We found on our own healing journey that pain draws energy inward, whereas empathy and forgiveness enable expansion, growth and freedom from suffering.